Six of Crows is a story that follows six main characters in a grimy world of crime, corruption, and a quite interesting magic system. We follow a gang called the Dregs on a mission to break out a character of an impenetrable fortress. The Dregs are the gang we follow, and they're led by a main character called Kaz Brekker and 5 other characters that we will talk about later in this video. If you haven't read the Shadow and Bone series set within the same world called the Grishaverse, I don't think it's necessary. I know people who have read that series and didn't enjoy it, or people who haven't read it at all, who are able to pick up this book and have a really enjoyable experience. I know for me, I didn't really love the Shadow and Bone series, but as soon as I picked up this book, I found a really enjoyable experience. So if you either haven't read the Shadow and Bone series or you didn't like it when you did read it, I honestly suggest picking up this book. This book is like an Ocean's 11 movie set in a grimdark fantasy world. The book starts off with a lot of names and terminology that if you haven't read the previous books you may not be familiar with, and that can feel like you're thrown in the deep end. All I can say is hold on, get through that very early section, and you will really enjoy the book from then on. It certainly wasn't too long into the story that I found myself sitting back and going, wow, this is a heist and I'm hooked. As soon as we found out that our main characters were going on this heist and the impossible things that they had to overcome, like all good heist narratives, I found myself sitting back and going like, yeah, this is it. This is going to be a really good book and I'm hooked. All the mysteries that our author had set up and all the ways that had to be overcome, I was really interested to see what happened. I know a few people have found the start quite slow, but they certainly found the second half of the book a much better read. So again, if you are reading this book right now and you're finding it quite slow and you're trying to see whether you should continue on with it, I do suggest going on with it. So let's jump into a quick rundown of all the characters without spoilers, and then we'll go into some pros I found about the books, some things that I didn't like as much, a quick summary, and then a suggestion of if you liked certain parts of this book, what books you should pick up in the future if you haven't already. So let's jump into our main character, Mr. Kaz Brekker. Kaz is, for all intensive purposes, the leader of our group in this story. The Dregs, the group they're part of, has a leader, but Kaz is certainly the one that's calling the shots throughout pretty much this entire book. Kaz doesn't get a heap of point of views throughout the book, which is done on purpose to keep him quite mysterious, and you know, if we had his point of views we would probably find out things a lot quicker and it would get rid of a lot of those mysteries. So the author's done a really good job of just giving us Kaz points of views here and there. Viewed through other characters' eyes, he is incredibly competent, incredibly smart, always one step ahead, but he's really lacking in empathy for other characters. He's an arsehole. Even through some of Kaz's points of views, they didn't sell me enough that he's not an arsehole. He's really overconfident and he doesn't seem to trust anyone outside of himself. We know through his points of views that that's not entirely correct, but again, we don't get enough of him to really say yes or no. All I can say is that he's a great character. He's essentially an anti-hero. He doesn't do things for morally great reasons a lot of the time. He's greedy, he just wants to win, and he really wants revenge. One of Kaz Brekker's main counterparts is Inej. She is also known as the Wraith, and she is a young girl, very competent, and throughout the book she does impossible feats. She is silent where other characters should be able to realize that she's there. She breaks into houses, she climbs in impossible situations to get up on top of roofs and get our main characters out of a lot of issue. She's incredibly competent, she's quiet, she's shy, and she's the one character from the get-go that I think we really like. I think she's put in there to empathize with because she is this young quiet girl, and she acts as a bit of a counterbalance to Kaz, who's quite brash and outspoken and overconfident. Our next character that we're going to talk about is Nina. She's the only full Grisha in the book. If you don't know what a Grisha is, That is the magic system that takes place in this world. Nina is, again, she's another very competent character. Most of our main characters are. She's very passionate and she's very likable. Even people who I've seen complain about the character work in this book always seem to still like Nina. She has a romance plot with another character that I will talk about next, Matthias, that certainly seems to make him more likable and fleshes out his storyline a bit more. For people who have, well, let's jump straight into Matthias. For people who have complained about character work, he seems to be their main issue. He is your standard good-looking soldier grunt boy. He's not overly smart in the sense of the word. A lot of things have gone past him in the past, and he's the person who's done things and he's now trying to make up for those actions that he's done in the past. He's looked back, realized that he was indoctrinated into a system of hate, and he wants to change that. He certainly feels a little bit surface level for me personally. It doesn't mean that I don't like his character. It doesn't mean that I don't like his character arc. I think despite seeing where it was going to go from the start, his romance plot with Nina is certainly something that it just helps make him more likable because we like Nina and she likes him. Our next character in the group is Jesper. Jesper is our group's sharpshooter and gambling addict. He's quick-witted, quick to a joke, and quick to chase the thrill in everything he does. He is a great character and he's extremely likable. And our last character of the group is Wylan. Wylan is a rich merchant's son. He is estranged from his dad, and as we go through the book, you'll find out more about his relationship with his dad, but there's still a lot of unanswered questions even by the end of this book. He is the group's demolition expert, and he is probably the one character that comes across not as competent as the rest. He's probably the one that's less competent, and for that reason you may be more likable. You feel like you're living this through him. He's the one character who I believe the author probably set into the book to ask a lot of questions. It's once you start reading books like this, you'll start to find there's always one character that asks questions and gets the answers, and that's where you as the reader can put yourself in their shoes to find out the information, and that's where I think Wylan probably comes from. But that doesn't make him a bad character. It actually makes him a really nice character because you find out things from his perspective. So let's jump into things that I really liked about this book. Even though parts of this book, it's a heist. So you know that things are going to go wrong. You know they're probably going to get backstabbed at some point. You know that their plans, even these seemingly impossible feats they've got to overcome, they probably will somehow. And that probably the person planning this has more information than they've given the rest of our cast and our reader. Even though, all of these things go into a heist. And so when you're reading this book, even though you probably see some of the twists coming, you may not know exactly what direction they're coming from, or they're just executed really well and they're enjoyable. They're really enjoyable to read. I certainly enjoy a good heist book, a good heist movie, and the last couple of heist books that I've read have definitely solidified that for me. And the author still gets to build a good sense of tension through that, even though you know that some of these things are going to go wrong. The author, Lee, sets up a lot of mysteries at the start of the book that you spend your book finding out. Some of these are answered at different points throughout the book, and some we don't get answers to at all. It's one of those things, if you're a reader who's really frustrated by not knowing things and having things held back from you, this may not be the book to read. If you're a reader who loves that and loves trying to find these things out on your own, then this book is a fantastic book. Another great thing about this book is that as Lee has written this book and as we read this book, the stakes get larger. So the tension gets higher and the action scenes get more grand. I've seen the occasional complaint about the way the book, almost at the halfway point of the heist, just flips from without giving away spoilers, from one way of doing it to a complete opposite. Suddenly these action scenes are just, you know, things blowing up and full-blown action. So let's jump into some things that I didn't really love as much about the book. We get 5 point of views from the 6 main characters. I think Wylan is the only character that doesn't get a point of view from our main cast of the Dregs in this book. And the issue that I tended to find was that despite the fact we're getting 5 different characters' point of views, they all start to sound the same. What I would have loved is for each character's point of view, even without looking at the name, to have known that that's whose head we were in. That can just be done by, say, for example, the Wraith. If we're talking about Inej, her, instead of describing things artistically or like Kaz Brekker would, she would be looking for escape routes, she'd be looking for things to climb, she'd be looking for ways to get out information that she could find. If you're not careful, you can start to forget exactly what character's head you're in, you know, until you reach the dialogue. Whereas one of my favourite things about certain other authors that they do is that you could take away the names and know exactly whose head you're in from the descriptions that you're reading. So that's something that, you know, if you're not careful, can get a little bit confusing. And I hope that Lee can take the mannerisms of her characters to really build them out and make them stand out on their own, even if you're not sure whose point of view you're reading at the time.
So I've just finished recording the video, and while I was going through and editing it, I just wanted to pop in one point, and that is one thing that people may be frustrated about with this book is that there is a distinct lack of consequences for the characters. Our characters get put in some situations, some very overwhelming situations, and they overcome them in a way that should have more consequences for them than it does. And even the consequences that they do face don't seem to make a whole lot of difference. I think this, one thing why I didn't mention this in my review earlier is that I think this is a larger issue across YA. I think when you're writing a YA book and it's set in a place where guns and knives and, you know, all this killing does happen, it's quite hard to set up actual consequences for your actions without characters being killed, and that can make a YA book very quickly much darker than what an editor and an author want it to be. So yes, if you are someone who gets very frustrated with a lack of consequences, that may hamper your enjoyment of this book. But if you go into it knowing that, which I did, I went into it knowing this was supposed to be a YA book, I think it didn't hamper my enjoyment of the book, which is why it still got quite a high score.
One of the only other small negatives I have for this book is that if you're someone who gets frustrated with tragic character backstories, this is one of those books that you will probably be frustrated with the characters. Every one of these characters pretty much has something terrible that's happened to them. It's a part of the story mechanics, it helps their motivations, it shows how they've ended up in a gang called the Dregs, but it's something that can get a little bit frustrating if you don't like that. If you're someone who doesn't mind, or you're someone who actually likes your characters to have these sad backstories so that you can see where they've come from to where they are, then you will really enjoy this book. But it's something that I saw a few people complain about in other reviews. But the last one is that I feel like there was a lot of groundwork set up initially for these different gangs that live in this world, and I feel like that wasn't carried throughout the book. You know, we get certain small moments of seeing them and them playing a part, but I felt like the amount of groundwork we had to start with, they might have played a bigger part throughout this book. Hopefully that's just a loose end that had to be set up in book 1 that then carries through to book 2 and that gets tied up further as we go through that book. Before I jump into the summary of this book and other books that you may like if you liked this book, I just wanted to point out I got the collector's edition of this and Crooked Kingdom, and they are absolutely beautiful. We get a map at the start. Towards the end here, we have illustrations. There's red trimming. Like, this is a stunning book, and it's quite cheap for what you get. So if you want to pick up the same copy, I will put a link in the about section. If you want to help me out and give me a little kickback from Amazon Associates, then you can pick up your own copy from there. Let's jump into the summary. We're following a group called the Dregs on your basic heist story. There are some twists, there are some turns, there's some backstabbing. It's all really enjoyable. There's a great magic system to follow. There are 3 probably main romance plots throughout this book. And it's a really enjoyable read. I give this book an 8 out of 10. With the amount of hype that this book had, I wasn't sure whether I was going to like it as much as other people had, but it is a really enjoyable read. If you read this book and you really enjoyed it, and you enjoyed the heist part of it, then I would suggest reading the Mistborn books by Brandon Sanderson. They're a fantastic series that's got the same heist setup that you'll really enjoy. And if you enjoyed the world building, the gangs, the grimy, dark nature of the world, I've recently read The Lies of Locke Lamora, and it reminded me a little bit of that, and that is a book series that I think you will really enjoy if you enjoyed that part of this book. So thank you again to everyone who's watched so far, who's commented, who's supported, who's liked, and I will see you. I'm going to start reading the second book of this series now, and so I will talk to you about it soon. Cheers.